Hey gang! I thought today that I would demonstrate another way of spinning with beads. I have my coffee. Now for this you'll need a few supplies. So what I have here is a very finely spun single of BFL. Hold on, let me find the end. It's got to be here somewhere. Oh yeah, I'm off to a roaring start. There we go. So I have a very finely spun single of BFL in some pretty pastel-y colors. Pastel-y, is that a word? I have my lazy cage over here. You will need beads, obviously. So what I'm using are just some glassy beads. These are the, what are they called? 6? Yeah, 6/0. These ones I find work great for all kinds of fiber spinning. The smaller ones tend to be very hard to use because of the size of the hole. So you need a crochet hook, and we want to find a crochet hook that the tip will go through the bead. All right, so it looks like this is our winner, 0.85 millimeter hook. And if we take our bead, it will slide right onto the tip of that hook. Now, I put my beads into a bowl to make it easier to deal with, because if they're in the container, you have to keep shaking them out. So when they're in the bowl, you can just use your hook and just load it up with a few beads. So there we go. We get our beads onto our crochet hook, and then I'll just set it in the bowl like that so that the beads are already loaded and ready to go. Now we are going to be chain plying the single and adding the beads as we go. So I will get my wheel set up and adjust the camera, and then we will try another method of spinning with beads. Back in a sec. Now it's been a while since I spun this single, so I don't remember if I spun it S or Z. If you always spin the same way, it's not a concern. For me, I alternate because crochet does better with a final S ply. So I'm going to see which way it wants to ply. So if you take your yarn and you twist it, so right now we're adding clockwise twist, and you can see how it's fighting it, and it's not making a nice smooth ply. So we know it doesn't need a final Z twist. And if we spin it counterclockwise, it lays down in this nice ply. So we know we need to have S twist. So first thing we'll do is charge our leader with S twist. It's my rattly bobbin again. I have to finish some projects and free up some bobbins. All right, so we will take our single. I had to go a long way to find some twist because there is absolutely no active twist in this. It's been sitting so long. All right, so we'll put it through, make our knot, and start chain plying. Now I'm going to keep my my lazy Kate in my lap because I want to work close to the wheel. Oh, okay, so my chain ply broke. What I'm going to do is just tie a new knot and keep going. This is so fine that you probably won't even notice that little bit. All right, now it's time to add a bead. So we have our, what I call the tail over here, which is what we're going to pull through to make our next loop. So I'm going to get ready, go to there. Now I'm just going to take my loop. I'm going to grab my crochet hook that is preloaded with some beads. I'm going to hook that and pop the bead on. And then I'm going to set my crochet hook back in the bowl. Grab my loop. I'm going to push the bead up. And then I'm going to pull my tail through to make my next loop and keep spinning. Now, depending on how often you want your beads, I'm going to stop here. I'm going to drop my tail, grab my crochet hook. Now, you'll want this to be your single loop to be under tension. Otherwise, you're going to have a really hard time hooking it with your crochet hook like that. And you're going to end up with beads on the floor. I always do. Hook it, put it on, set your crochet hook aside, grab your loop. Now, when you bring it up, if you can see right there how it's curly-cued because my plies aren't even. So pull it all the way up, straighten it out so your plies are even. Just wiggle around your singles until that even out. Then you can see how the bead is right here. So we're going to pull our tail through, and that's going to lock that bead into place. And then we will add our twist. So now we have the bead plied right into the yarn. Now, if you're using a larger yarn or bigger beads, you might want to go to a larger orifice. Okay, time for a bead. So drop the tail, grab the loop, hold that under tension, hook, slide on our bead, get our fingers back in that loop. Oh, now we have a problem. It broke. So I'm just going to ply past the bead. I'm going to add a little bit of extra twist. Now, because this is such a fine singles, I'm not too worried about a knot showing. I'm going to loop, loop, catch my tail, and pull it through. And I'm going to leave that broken one hanging out. But it is knotted in there, so it's not going to undo. All right. And then when I'm done with the yarn, or I can even do it right now, I'll just trim that off. Now, the advantage of having the Lazy-Kate in your lap too is the distance you pull your loops is going to remain fairly consistent. All right, I need to add more beads to my crochet hook. So I'm just going to take my loop, hook it over there so I don't lose that loop. Hook it on whatever you have handy. The big thing is just to not lose your loop. I'm going to load up a few more beads. So I got 4 beads on there comfortably. Put that back aside because I'll need both hands again. Pick up your loop. Stretch that between your fingers to keep it under tension so you can hook. And then as you slide your bead on, let that tension off. Put your crochet hook back in the bowl. Slide it down until you can get your fingers in that loop. Slide it up, straighten out your plies, and then add your twist. So I'm basically adding a bead. I add a bead, spin that piece on, pull my next loop back, add a bead. So stretch out our yarn to keep it under tension. And as I slide the bead on, I let that tension off. Get my fingers in that loop, slide that bead up, and oops, spin the right way. So that's on, and then I'm going to add the bead here. Stretch that out. Hook your crochet hook, slide the bead on, put your crochet hook aside, get your fingers through the loop, slide it up, straighten out your plies, and spin. And lock that bead into place. One, and time to add another bead. You hook your crochet hook, figure out which side of your crochet hook is forward because the hooks are so small you're gonna have a hard time seeing them. I know if my size is up, that's the side my hook is on. So I hook it, release the tension as I slide the bead on, and then get my fingers back in that loop behind the bead. So that way it's not gonna fall off. I'm going to slide it up, just playing with the, hold on, let me get it closer. All right, I'm just playing with the tension on the bead to slide it up to where we're going to change for our next chain. So there's one and two. So now we need to add another bead. And you can see how far apart the beads are. Now for crochet, this would be perfect because you use so much more yarn for each stitch. So the beads would be far enough apart there. For knitting, I'd want them a little closer together. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start adding a bead every loop. I'm going to adjust that, spin this back on. Now here's a little bit of a crisis. My loop came off my post, so I've lost my loop. Don't let the twist go past your last switch. Grab any part you can find and pull the twist back, force it back into the already spun yarn, and you will be able to find your loop. You may have to wiggle around a bit to get your fingers back into it, but there we go. Now since I messed that up, I'm going to do one more loop just to get it evened out again. And now I'm going to start adding a bead to every loop. So I spun for a while, but with it being lace weight, it just takes forever. So I just did up a little bit, and I'm just gonna pull it off the wheel now using my handy dandy arm nitty knotty. Now while it feels like I didn't get much yardage, as I'm winding it off, I'm realizing I got way more than I thought. That's the thing with lace weight. I find when it comes to the plying, oh, it just seems to take forever and you never get anywhere. Then you get to the end of the project and you find out, holy, I've got a lot of yarn here. And that's kind of what's happening here. I didn't think I had this much. This makes me happy. I can do more with it than I thought. The beads look so pretty. They're like little dewdrops. Oh, listen to me. Dewdrops. Aren't I the artsy fartsy one? Hey, there's the end. Let's just tie this together and we'll have a look. Now I can actually reach the tying spot. If you're using your arm knitting knotty, whatever you do, make sure you tie around that yarn before you take it off. Otherwise it's going to go spring and you will be untangling it forever. Go ahead, ask me how I know. However, I'm going to live dangerously and I'm only going to tie once around the yarn. Ooh, such a rebel. So I would say, yeah, it's probably overspun a bit, but because the single rested so long before I spun it, I suspect once I wash it, it'll probably balance out quite fine. But here we go. Make a little mini skein out of it. Ooh, that's a trash little mini skein, but all right. So there's our little sample of beaded yarn. And you can see how the little beads are all like little dewdrops on the yarn. They're so cute. Let's get on to spinning with beads method number 2, and we'll put them both in the same video. And that way we can have a decent length video and I don't have to pull out all my bead spinning stuff again. Not that I mind. I like spinning with beads, but yeah. There we go. Since I'm set up today, we might as well do both. So I've assembled my gear. Here I have a textured yarn that I spun from roll eggs during my sit and spin video, no less. I have a bobbin of this. I have my lace weight that I was using in the initial project. The purples in it kind of match up, and I like that the yellow is kind of a little brighter, but because it's so fine, it's not really going to change the overall tone. Then I have these gorgeous beads. And when I put them with this, I just fall in love. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply this with this lace weight threaded with these beads, and we'll make a 2-ply yarn. So I'm going to take my little string of beads. I bought these at Michael's and they come on a little card strung onto fishing line. So what I'm going to do is take one of my handy dandy floss threaders. And I will just go through the center of these beads. And pull them onto my floss threader. So we have a bunch of these beads on our floss threader. We're just gonna grab our singles, really fine singles. I'm going to put it through the loop on the floss threader, and then we will just thread all those beads right onto that singles. And I'm going to keep doing this until I have all of these beads threaded onto this singles, and I'll be back. Alright, so I have my beads on my singles. Now they're really heavy, so I'm only loading that many for now. I can always just break my singles and reattach. And with this is the Lazy Cape from my Lendrum, and I find it handy to let these beads rest on the board so that the yarn isn't carrying the whole weight. Then I go through the little loop, which will keep the beads from coming up until I want them. All right, let's put a bead. So all we need to do is grab a bead from our supply down here, bring it around that and up. And then just spin around it and keep going. Let's put another bead. Grab one up. Now here's why I say you should have this in your lap, because if it's down on the floor, you're going to have to keep like reaching and it's going to get very tiresome. Whereas if you have it right here in your lap, it's easy peasy. You have everything under control right here. Now I have a little slub coming up right here. So I want to make sure that I'm not putting a bead in there, otherwise it'll cover up the bead. And what's the point of putting in the bead then? So we get this taken up, come around the bead, get a little shrubber on there. And then we're going to put another bead. Now you can be as consistent with the placement as you want to be, or as random as you want to be. It's your yarn. Make it the way you want. I think I'll start just when the bead reaches the orifice. I will add a new bead down here. Now this is an awfully fine yarn to be using to hold all the beads. Generally I would use a thicker thread, but I didn't have anything I liked to go with this. So I used this one because I do like how this one looks. And so far it seems to be holding up just fine. I was a little worried it would be too thin to handle the weight of the beads, but it seems to be doing just fine. And you can always try it, and if you find that your yarn is breaking and it's not working out, then just abandon it. Don't keep beating your head against the brick wall. Just stop, find a better thread, and then go back to it, because this is supposed to be fun. It's not supposed to be an agonizing chore of any kind. Now, I have a bead at the orifice, but I also had a poofy bit here. So I'm going to get my poofy bit on before I add my next bead. Now you can also take a few beads on the string and just cradle them in your hand. Hold on, let me get my singles through. There we go. Just cradle them in your hand. And then as you come to the part where you want the bead, just let it go on. But it's really going to depend on the strength of your ply thread. This one seems, actually it's taking it so much better than I thought it would. The weight, I mean, and the constant abrasion. Because the beads moving over it are going to abrade the yarn. So you want to make sure it's not going to snap from that. Sometimes if it gets a little stuck, you might have to give it a little yank just to get a bead over a hump of some kind. Oh, one bead left. All right. Wrangle that up here. All right, so now I am out of the beads that are threaded on. What I'm going to do is pull off some of this, break off that singles. Now I want to keep it, the twist, from entering between these two at the moment. So I'm going to go one on either side of my orifice hook and then wrap that over just to hold it in place. And then I'm going to load up the beads onto here again. And then we will reattach and keep going. There we go. And there we go. All our beads are threaded on. Now the reason why I got such a huge pack of floss threaders is because they're really easy to lose. And with use, this piece here, as you can see, is starting to get a point on it. And eventually it will break. Oh no, they've got a chipmunk. Oh no. Hey, where are you going with that? That is not a chipmunk. That's a freaking bird. Here's what my boys brought me today. Yeah, that's right. That's a bird. Just taking him outside and letting him escape. That's a big bird. I don't know how they caught that when they were in a cage. All right, the bird is fine. He flew away after a minute of sitting there going, "What just happened to me?" Sorry for the drama, but this is what my life is actually like. Fortunately, in the process of rushing to rescue this bird, I didn't drop anything. So that's Bobo climbing his cat tower. He's wound up now, especially since I took his toy away. So life with cats, I'm telling you. So what we're going to do is, this is where we broke our singles. So we're going to pinch here. We're going to build up our twist. Then we're going to take the singles we're adding in that we've now got strung with beads. We're going to lay it in that V. Put the end that way. And we're going to put this end this way. And then we're going to spin. And what will happen there is that overlap will secure that single. So we'll trim it off. Make sure you don't cut your single again. All right. And I'll clean that up after I've finished processing it, washing it and whatnot. And we are going to go back to spinning. All right. So I'm going to put a few of these beads in my hand. All right. So we'll put a bead in there. I think I bumped my tripod when I jumped up to rescue the poor bird. All right, there we go. And pop another bead in there. You kind of have to move the yarn over the bead, otherwise it'll just keep sliding. Now, when you come to where you want a bead, hold on, I'm going to get a couple more in my hand. If you want them to stick out more, when you come to your bead, pull it out and then spin. So what you end up with, oh, that one didn't work so well, but it ends up with your bead sitting more on the surface and less in the yarn. All right, so bring this up. There we go. That one worked better. So then it's sitting more on the surface. So there's our bead. We want to pull it out so that what basically is becoming our core, our little singles. So it's hanging, but when you twist it, it will wrap that around there to secure your bead better, but it will sit very much on the surface of the yarn because it has a little bit of slack there. It's just another method of doing it to give it a different look, as opposed to this is how it would normally look. Here, let me pull that one back and we can compare the two. You can see how this one sits more on the surface and this one is snuggled more into the yarn. It's just a different look. You can go with it, whichever one you want. This one would sit more into the fabric and this one would sit more on top of the fabric when you knit or crochet with it. Now when you're spinning and you have a slub like this, twist as it's wrapping on, and that will give it more definition. Basically, you're putting some twist back into it before it wraps onto your singles. Now I am constantly twisting the yarn with my fingers, which is basically adding more twist before it goes into the ply, which gives it this much better definition. If I just straight ply them together, any of those little poofs, like here, just flatten out and they're not as attractive. But if you add some twist before it wraps on, it'll keep a much better definition and make more like a spiral than just a flat little fluff. At this point, I am out of that type of bead. So what I'm going to do is I will just continue applying the rest of it, just in a nice spiral ply. So then I will have a short length of beaded for the edging, and then the rest of the project here. I want beaded yarn skein separate from my regular skein. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to cut it. I'm going to knot this side. I'm going to knot this side. Then I'm going to knot them together. So this way, when I'm done spinning and washing and drying the yarn, I will know where the division is between the beaded portion and the non-beaded portion. So now I can just proceed to finish this off as a slubby type yarn. Oh, that feels so soft. And I will have a skein of regular yarn and a skein of beaded yarn to work together in a project or to use in separate projects. So I'm going to go ahead and finish that. I'll come back when we take it off on the nitty naughty. It's done! Yay! So I'm going to wind her up onto my nitty naughty, correct name this time. And because it is a spirally textured yarn, I will steam this rather than wash it, since I know now that I can use my steam cleaner to steam yarns. I'll be doing that a lot more. With the textured yarns, if you wash them, they tend to flatten out your beautiful spirals that you just spent all that time making, and it just sort of turns the yarn to mush. Steaming seems to maintain the crispness of the spirals, but still sets that twist properly. But I have to say that this yarn is looking so pretty. I'm actually so happy with how it's turned out. I did not expect it to look this good. I know it's crazy. Why would you make it if you don't expect it to look that good? But sometimes I'm surprised by just how something turns out. Actually, I have to say most of the time I'm surprised by how something turns out and how pleased I end up with it. Since I don't consider myself an expert in any way, shape, or form, I just enjoy the process of creating and seeing what happens. All right, now we're hitting the beaded section. And I'm still going to leave it all in one skein until after it's been steamed and dried. And then I will separate it into two different skeins at that point. Now I don't want to tie it too tight. I want it to be able to move a bit, so as I'm setting the twist, the yarn could move. And I think 2 ties is going to be enough. But you can see here how the beads look in the yarn. I think they look so pretty. take it off the nitty naughty and see how much of a tangled mess we have on the hands. Woo! Yeah. This is definitely gonna need some steaming to kind of set that twist to even it out. So that's another way to spin beads onto yarn. So I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, do the stuff down below because I do stuff like this all the time. Thanks for joining me, guys.